And we organize ourselves using a Discord server. People came and went over time, but there were some of us who stayed in touch quite often. Out of organizing gaming sessions, we became very good friends. Insurgency, for those who haven't played it, is one of those super realistic military shooters that tend to get really very intense and sometimes downright scary when it's at its best. He didn't say we had some sort of brotherly bond, and I know it's just a video game, but as a small group of us would say, he ended up making very good friends and creating bonds of friendship through hard teamwork to win rounds, not to mention sweat on his hands during the adrenaline-filled shootouts. One of them was a boy named Colin. One day Colin told us he couldn't play Insurgency for a while because he had accepted a job teaching English as a foreign language in Indonesia a long time ago. He wanted to travel, but he lacked the money and the qualifications to teach. It gave him the opportunity to see exotic regions of the world while being paid. We were quite disappointed when we heard the news. She was an incredible sniper on several occasions, when an enemy with a machine gun had us trapped. The shooting stopped suddenly, followed by the laughter of Colin, who shouted in his Scottish accent, "Take that!" We adored him for those moments, but we were still very happy for him. As promised to stay on the Discord server, we could keep in touch and hear stories of his adventures in that exotic country. So a few months passed and we heard stories of his travels, while updating us with photos of his exploration of remote areas of Indonesia. But it was the photos of him with the students at the school where he taught that really made me smile. He seemed to have a lot of fun, especially when we saw him teaching the kids weird English phrases. And not only that, we occasionally heard some children repeat those phrases with a Scottish accent. And the idea of a bunch of Indonesian kids all learning English with Edinburgh accents struck us as absolutely hilarious. Imagine an American greeting an Indonesian fellow, "How you doing, buddy?" "I'm doing great." That answer still makes me laugh. And then, in September 2018, I woke up to the news that there had been an earthquake off the coast of Indonesia, thus causing an earthquake that caused a massive tsunami that destroyed huge parts of the country. I immediately thought of Colin and got into Discord using the app on my phone. I immediately texted him asking if he was okay and hoping he hadn't been caught in the tsunami. Obviously there was a huge 7-8 hour time difference between the UK and Southeast Asia, and sometimes Colin would not respond for hours. So the fact that he didn't respond right away wasn't much of a concern to me. But the problem is he didn't answer me all day, so much so that I started voicing my concerns to other members of the server. By telling them about the tsunami, I mentioned my concern that Colin had been caught in it. We knew from the news that region of Indonesia had been affected, but we didn't know exactly where Colin was. We knew he was in a remote area, and that I didn't always have immediate access to Wi-Fi. All the more reason to worry. But he didn't answer the next day or the day after that either. And we got to a point where a week had gone by and we hadn't heard from him. No one had seen Colin, not even online, since we got the news of the tsunami. That's when we really cared. And as the days passed, we became more afraid that something serious had happened to him. At that moment I began to examine the messages he had sent. The previous month he had toured Indonesia and spent his first weeks in the capital Jakarta, which was not affected by the earthquake or the tsunami that followed. But then I found out he had traveled to a place called Palu, to teach English there, and from what I understand, that's where he was at the time of the catastrophe when it happened. Then I searched the internet for the name of the place to find stories about the tsunami, and discovered that it was one of the places most affected by the destructive tide, which apparently reached 7 meters high, 7 meters of rushing water that destroyed almost everything in its path and caused the death of more than 15,000 people. It seems highly probable that Colin had indeed been one of them. We were absolutely heartbroken, but the most harrowing aspect of it all is that until today we still have no news. You know Colin very well, but he kept his personal and online life pretty separate. We never knew his last name or the names of his family, so it's not like we could contact them to find out if he really died or not, or to see if there were funeral arrangements if he really died during the tsunami. But the fact that his Discord account remains inactive until now, proof that he really lost his life there. Maybe he's okay and just didn't come back to Discord. Maybe his encounter with death made him realize that video games were just a waste of time or something. But I think this is just a dream. Deep down I know he's probably dead already. I just hope he's at peace now and his whole family's okay. Rest in peace, Colin. We still miss you. Years ago I met a girl on Tinder with whom I had a very strong connection. We went for a coffee that turned into a couple of glasses, and you ended up making sparks fly, and then boom, we got caught up in a whirlwind of romance. We texted each other constantly when we were apart, dreaming of vacations together. In short, all those things that young people do when they have a new and vibrant relationship. But one day, when everything seemed perfect, she made me sit down to have a serious conversation. I thought it was some kind of breakup, so I braced myself for the worst. But luckily it wasn't as bad as I thought. It was just a little weird for me. It was something out of the ordinary. She told me she was polyamorous. At that moment she didn't know the meaning of that. I stared at her with a confused expression. What led her to explain to me was that polyamory wasn't a very common term, but it basically means that you share a loving relationship with several people at the same time. She says she can commit to me, but that she should have the freedom to see other people, albeit in a less serious way. Being young and silly and totally captivated by her, I accepted. In the end, it was the worst decision of my life. I told him he could do whatever he wanted, but on the condition that he didn't talk to me about it. She agreed, but over time I started to feel jealous. He tried to solve it by showing me the app he used to find other polyamorous people and get to know them, something called Discord. It seems like it's mostly used to communicate in video games, but I've learned that people also use that thing to do all sorts of weird things, including dating. The girl tells me I'm welcome on her server and look for someone who is open to casual dating. I thought it was fair, so I did. I created an account and she invited me to a little server innocently called The Farm, even though she had nothing to do with anything agricultural in inviting me. The girl introduced me as her partner and asked some members to accompany me through the different channels. In fact, they were quite kind, talking to me about polygamy and praising me for the kindness of my partner. That somehow made me feel warm and better. I started wiring with another girl. On the server we get along well, but I don't see myself moving any further with her. I only did it to make the girl I was watching happy, and apparently I pulled it off and earned a lot of loyalty points. All is well. What ends well is well. A week after using Discord, I got a message from someone I initially thought was a girl. We greeted each other and began to talk briefly. Then I got a message with a photo. It wasn't a girl, but a boy. The picture was precisely the kind of picture I didn't want to see at all. I leave the content of the image to your imagination. Just imagine the worst possible thing a perverted guy could send you over the internet. And you hit the nail. He followed the photo saying he wanted to sleep with me and my friend at the same time. I ignored the messages, assuming that they would expel the subject from the server for failing to comply with the rules, and I finally told my friend, but she, on the contrary, did not seem to react the same as me. In fact, she said that she had been talking to him for a long time, and that he was usually very nice and polite, and that I was making up a story by pretending that I was just jealous, etc. I expressed my discomfort with the idea of a three-person relationship and my refusal to participate in it. But again, she has the right to do whatever she wants as long as I don't have to hear anything about it. That drama calmed down and I thought it was the end of it all. But it wasn't at all. It was like that. A month later, the intensity with the girl continues the same, and while I was out shopping, I noticed something that caught my attention. It's one of those things you don't really pay attention to unless it happens to you. It's hard to describe, but generally every person who walks into a grocery store picks up a cart or basket. People who rush in to grab one or two items do so in just 1 minute. I remember seeing a guy pacing up and down the halls with nothing in his hands. I wondered what this guy was doing here. I wasn't doing anything too weird, so I kept doing my thing, but every time I was in an aisle picking things off the shelves and watching him come and go. Sometimes we even make eye contact, nothing scary, just occasional glances. But it happened to me over and over to the point where I wondered, are you following me? In short, I did my shopping, finished and walked home forgetting what happened. Hours later, I'm in my apartment alone, relaxed, enjoying a hearty dinner from a local Chinese restaurant ordered at home. But I hear heavy footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. Nothing out of the ordinary. Actually, suddenly the apartment door shudders with a loud bang from outside. At first I thought it was a neighbor, so I screamed, "But what are you doing, buddy?" But I got no answer, just another hard knock on the door. He wasn't trying to get my attention, he was trying to force his way in. I was about to jump out of my skin, but I instinctively picked up my phone to dial 911. I ran to my room, knelt by the safe under my bed, where my .40 caliber was. I informed the operator of the situation and she confirmed that the police were already on their way. However, I didn't know how much time I had left before they managed to get in. I went back into the hallway with my gun secured and loaded, pointing to the door. I exclaimed, "The police are coming." But that didn't deter those on the other side. He kept banging on the front door, and with each knock I felt my door getting more and more ready to give way. It was only when I said, "I got a faulty here, dude. Don't make me use it." The blows stopped at that precise moment. Sirens are heard approaching. Then he hears more heavy footsteps from the outside staircase, and then everything is silent again. Shortly after, I testified to the police with my phone in my hand. I got a message from my girlfriend. "I'm sorry." When the cops left, I called her and asked, "Why are you sorry?" We finished, and while he answered me between sobs, I understood something that tightened my jaw. Here's a summary of what he told me. She mentioned that she was dating the guy who sent me the inappropriate photo, who had apparently gotten really weird. She told him she had to break up with me because he wanted her as his main partner. She started saying that she didn't agree with polygamy, that I wasn't good for her and other things. Then he got aggressive when talking about it. She fired him and forbade him to contact her again. This guy came from a city on the other side, and my friend thought he would just drive away, but he didn't, and apparently he got quite a bit of information about me from her. Maybe he even checked his phone for my pictures to find me. And that's when I finally understood. It was him in the store and the one who had followed me to my apartment. He waited into the night to try to force his way in, to confront me, beat me, or kill me. God only knows what he intended to do with the polygamy thing. Not only did it make me jealous, it also put me in danger. If that guy had been more patient and waited for me to take out the garbage, I probably wouldn't be here writing my experience, and that scared the hell out of me. I suppose you guys would have reacted the same way. The relationship with the girl ended shortly after. I was sad, of course, but that experience was totally fatal to our relationship. We couldn't go back, we never spoke again after that. But I told him to tell that nasty guy that we were done, and that I don't want to hear any more of that story, to leave me alone if I didn't want to go back to his city in a coffin. Now just hearing about Discord or just hearing their name leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and I know that there are people who use the internet for worse things than I experienced years ago. It belonged to a Discord server, Horror Stories. It was a place where people shared personal horror stories they had experienced, and for a while it was a lot of fun. Many of the stories seemed contrived, usually involving things like seeing a shadow at the foot of the bed and other elements that looked like something out of a bad horror movie. But sometimes someone shared a story that wasn't supernatural, natural enough to believe. And those stories were truly terrifying. I have read very scary stories that give goosebumps on those servers, but I have forgotten many over time. Probably because although they were scary, they weren't so disturbing as to leave me with an aftermath. But there was one story in particular that I haven't forgotten because it really made me cringe reading it. I hope this user will allow me to share their story, and if you hear this story, please let me know in the comments if I make any mistakes. Since I'm telling you this from memory anyway, here's the story. The user began her story by stating that it was not a mere invention despite being young. When it happened, just thinking about writing about the subject as an adult was quite stressful. She explained that her early years were marked by the tragic death of her father from an overdose. When she was very young, she was raised by a single mother who lived in a small apartment down the street. Next to her grandmother's house, her mother clearly looked for new relationships to try to do the right thing and find them a stepfather so they have a father figure in their life. The incident in question occurred when she was on a date. Naturally, it was their grandmother who came to look after them whenever their mother needed to go somewhere where she couldn't take them with her. On the night of her date, Grandma was working. Although it was not ideal, the user was left alone without supervision when he should be about 10 or 9 years old, but the narrator quickly reassured the server members by telling them that this was when Yu-Gi-Oh was popular. They kept their letters and cartoons in a box for entertainment. Leaving them alone for 1 to 2 hours was not a problem for them. It's not like they're going to wander around the apartment or do anything wrong while Yu-Gi-Oh entertained them. But sometime in the night they were sitting playing with their card and watching TV when they heard a knock on the window. Remember, they lived on the ground floor of the apartment, so anyone could have approached and knocked on the glass window. There was no jumping or climbing necessary, so there was nothing particularly worrying or scary about someone touching the glass window. The accountant gets up and walks to the window before drawing the curtains and revealing the face of a man who was a complete stranger. He wasn't his grandfather or uncle, but a total stranger. Surprised and confused, they moved away from the window, letting the curtains close. But that was before there was a horrible sound of breaking glass. The fragments fell to the carpet and floor before another blow sent more shiny pieces in front of them. At that point, they simply threw his card to Yu-Gi-Oh on the floor and fled, running towards the back door of the apartment, towards their neighbor's house. They knocked on the door in a state of utter terror as they glanced over their shoulders from time to time to make sure the mysterious predator wasn't chasing them. Fortunately, the neighbors opened the door and took the time to calm the accountant so that he will tell them the whole story. They called the police, who arrived quickly after obtaining the description of the house and the invasion in progress. Then the neighbor decides to call the accountant's mother to give her the bad news. She ran home to comfort her children. Scared. Afterwards, the neighbor and the narrator's mother accompanied them back to the apartment while the police searched the property and the surroundings for signs of an attempted intrusion. Then a cop approaches the mother and shows her something in a clear bag. The mother stares. The bag turns pale. She kneels and hugs the accountant tightly, trying to hold back her tears as the neighbors exclaim, "Oh my God." The family stayed a week at Grandma's house waiting for the window to be repaired, which was too long for that job. And if they think they wanted to stay away from home as long as possible, they're probably right. Our narrator had suspected for some time, but she was very young to understand the implications of what happened. They did not understand the great danger they experienced that night. when their mother explained to them that after that night, not only was the window replaced, but the entire apartment was equipped with new incredibly resistant locks, closed-circuit cameras, and almost everything that a security room could have. Our grandparents paid for all that in full. The whole family was totally terrified. It was all because of the evidence the cops showed my mom. That night, the tiny thing in the clear plastic paralyzed her and made her hug her children tightly. What was in that plastic bag was a photograph. The photograph of a child sleeping peacefully in his bed, and that child was our accountant. The mother told the accountant much more when he was older, saying the photo couldn't have been taken long before the attempted break-in. Something about the bed sheets that were pretty new or something, or maybe a new haircut the kid had just gotten. I forgot that detail, but hey, that detail made it clear that the intruder had gotten into the apartment somehow, perhaps only a week before, thus taking a picture of the young narrator while he slept. I can only imagine what he must have done to several other children as well. Creating a catalogue of potential victims, studying them for hours before choosing the one that appeals to him the most. That was what terrified me most about reading their story. The idea that the intruder had taken that perverse taste for them and they were becoming so strong that they couldn't resist their impulse, or any kind of twisted or sick desire that drove them to break that window. That night, the family only felt safe upon hearing the news. A person with a profile uncannily similar to the victim was captured by the police, extradited to another state and imprisoned. But they kept all that a secret from our narrator until her late teens. After that there were no more details or big conclusions. It was something that had haunted her for years. I've never read anything as horrible as that on a Discord server, and everything else seemed harmless in comparison. I stopped reading shortly after. It's weird when we look for scary things, sometimes just to give us a little chill. But we end up really traumatized. Not by the little skeleton stories. No, but by things that could easily have happened to any of us. My son was very active on Discord, a messaging app for video game players. From what I understood, that allowed him to communicate with players from all over the world of the same games. At some point he gave us some news. He talked to Lori, a girl from the UK. She and he became friends playing some kind of pirate games. They played together almost daily and talked constantly, even without being in front of the computer. Finally he proposed to her and she accepted. It was a new concept for me, who grew up when cell phones didn't even exist, but I understand that we live in a digital age where new ways of meeting people emerge, so I just tried to be happy for him, like any mother would be when her son has his first girlfriend or boyfriend, and with an ocean in between. It's not like I have to worry about her getting pregnant by accident. But one Sunday afternoon my son comes out of his cave. Apparently for the first time in days he enters the room where my husband and I are sitting with a very worried expression. We ask him what happened and he shrugs, telling us that everything is fine. Then he walked away again. How can you imagine? My husband and I looked at each other with an expression that meant, "But what's wrong with him?" My husband gets up and follows our son around the room. Before politely asking him the reason for his sadness, he told me, our son was just pretending that everything was fine, as children usually do, but in a way that clearly tells us that he is upset about something. My husband told me that he had asked about Lowry, and our son responded in an almost visceral way saying, "Why are they always meddling in my affairs, blah blah blah." He had obviously touched on a sensitive subject. So our overall conclusion was that he and Lori must have broken up and that he just didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to pressure him and somehow left him alone so he could move on. But the next month our son looked more depressed, spent more and more time in his room. He would only go out to go to school or eat, and then turn around when he locked himself in his little cave as a child. Like I said, we thought it was because he had broken up with his girlfriend over the internet. But once my husband walked by his room and clearly heard him talking to someone on his little voice chat. On Discord he spoke to her by calling the baby, and at one point he even heard Lori. Apparently they still had contact at that time, but we always assumed that they had relationship problems, adding to the fact that they were thousands of kilometers away from each other. I know that long-distance relationships almost never work, even when people were only a few states away, but these guys were an ocean apart. God only knows how hard it must have been for them. Despite that, we learned that that wasn't exactly the problem, but that it was something much darker. As I mentioned, our son seemed to be more depressed during the month, and it was so bad that at some point, my husband and I considered taking it to a therapist or something to cut the problem at the root before it became something more difficult to handle. But suddenly out of nowhere he starts to improve psychologically, he looks better, he suddenly feels more animated and becomes considerably more sociable even. He seemed excited to spend more time with us, something strange for a 16-year-old boy. It's not like that will bother us, it does us a lot of good to see it, to feel better. And we think he probably found another girl or finally cut the rice out of his life to move on. That kind of cheerful behavior continued for about a week until one Saturday after lunch we didn't see him again all day. At the end of the afternoon my husband and I went up to his room, knocked on the door and asked our son if he was okay. My husband returns to the living room and informs me that he got no response despite knocking on the door. Then he asked me if I saw him leave the house that day and I said no. And if he'd gone to a friend's house he probably wouldn't have told me. My husband shrugged and told me he had a headache. Then he went to the basement bathroom to get an aspirin from the medicine cabinet. Suddenly I hear him bounding down the hall and hurrying up the stairs. His feet would bang 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 as he ran to my son's room. At that moment I'm very confused and I wonder, but what is happening? From my location I see the downstairs bathroom and what I observe freezes my blood. We kept the painkillers and medications in a little plastic first aid kit, always full to the brim, but there it was, on the bathroom floor, almost empty, as was my husband. I understood what had happened. I ran to my son's room and found my husband bent over his bed, shaking him as if he wanted to wake him up. You hear me awake? There was a puddle of vomit next to his head on the bed and he was unconscious. There were even empty boxes of pills lying on the floor. Upon entering, my husband called 911 and I took over, shook him begging him to open his eyes. The room was lit only by his computer screens. In an instant I observed one of the most chilling things I have ever witnessed. On the screen was a webcam window from Discord that I have already talked about. The image showed the body of a young woman swinging in the air. It took me 1 second to realize what I was seeing, and when I understood it, I almost screamed the house down. She was hanging. Of course I tried not to look. I really tried to just focus on my son. As my husband ran to the room with the emergency services on the other end of the line, I should have told him not to look, but I was too confused. He could barely speak when he returned to the room and began describing our son's condition to the person on the other end of the line. He was talking when suddenly he did the same thing as me and turned to the computer screen, where the young woman's body was still suspended in the air. My husband is standing there completely paralyzed and stops talking on the phone. He stays like this long enough to hear the operator say, "Sir, there you are, sir." Then he comes out of the trance and continues talking to the emergency operator. At that moment he turned off the computer by reflex. He even had time to give the girl's address to medical services so that they could treat her. They took our son to the hospital and performed the gastric lavage immediately. We waited all night in the visitors area until a doctor came to give us an update on our son's condition. My heart was pounding as I braced myself for the worst, but luckily we got him to the hospital just in time and the nurses were able to give him a stomach lavage and give him the necessary medications to counteract the effects of what he had already taken. She barely survived, but the same couldn't be said of the girl on the computer. It's Lori, the girl I'd had a long-distance relationship with for so long. When our son woke up and saw us in the hospital room, he burst into tears. He apologized over and over and we all cried together. Then he started telling us what happened and honestly I couldn't believe it. Turns out they had formed a murder type. Just as he was beginning to move forward and feel better, he told us that he and she had found a solution to escape those pains that tormented him. He was willing to do anything for her. After that we decided to prescribe him a therapist and now he's much better. We decided not to monitor his online activities because he would always find a way to hide them. Still, we take the precaution of not leaving your computer in your room. Since then my husband and I have worked hard to uncover a little of what's lurking on the internet. And believe me, there are days I wish I hadn't. Because, my God, there are horrible, terrible things I wish I'd never seen and I can't get out of my head anymore. I used to play Insurgency Sunstrom with a set group of guys and a few girls.